You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tami Urbanek.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on Spreaker.com and on YouTube. I'm Tami Urbanek. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth is always on demand and with many new episodes. My website, empowermentthroughhealing.org, has a page specifically for life energy flow Tai Yi treatments. There's a treatment called Stress of Death. That is specifically for individuals who are suffering from PTSD and they need some assistance in feeling a relief from the symptoms while they're also pursuing counseling and therapy. So Stress of Death is a very strong treatment that can begin relieving those symptoms that a person might be feeling as a result of PTSD. You can read more about it at my website, again, empowermentthroughhealing.org. My guest this week is Donna L Quesinberry. Donna experienced severe trauma in childhood, and that led to more trauma in her adult years. Rather than be a victim of trauma, she chose to transcend it. How did she do that? We're going to listen to her story, her journey for truth right here. Donna, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Well, yes, good day.
First, will you share with us the trauma that you experienced at age 12?
When I was 12 years old, I should give a little backstory. My mother had been in Pennsylvania. The Susquehanna River had overflowed, and my grandparents had been flooded. So she was up there for a while, and we were with my father, who was a wonderful individual, real estate broker, and did really great things. Mm-hmm. But they came back together just at Christmas time, and I had friends who wanted me to go to the mall with them, and I said I would like to go. My father, of course, said yes. And my mother said no, and I kind of played them against each other.
As most kids do.
Yeah, as every 12-year-old does.
True.
And that kind of pitted part of the understory of what had actually occurred. But I did go to the mall, and while I was there, my friends all wanted to smoke marijuana, and I had never done that, and I didn't want to do that. And then they left me with this man, and he inadvertently raped me. He put his coat over my, he kind of got me down into some bushes, and, he got me down into some bushes, and while there, he put his coat over my head, and he kept telling me how wonderful it's going to be, whatever, and he bruised me from my chin down to my navel. He just kind of, all I can ration it to is like a beast, kind of like devouring me.
Wow.
I screamed and fought, and I had bushes going into my head, and I remember, you know, the feeling if you've ever fell into bushes, of the scratching on my scalp, and rocks and gravel and all kinds of things were going into my vagina. I was screaming, and then he put the coat over harder, and I guess I realized as a 12-year-old that probably wasn't a good idea to scream anymore, so the act culminated. And then, being that I had not been sexually involved, I hadn't had any idea what sexuality was. I pretty much was still where I would play basketball and win. I remember my mother told me when I was young that I should let the boys win, and I didn't understand that concept. If I could beat them at basketball, I did. But anyhow, so I didn't say anything about it. I thought that was the act of sex. And I remember I was thinking to myself at the time, in shock, that why would anybody want to do that twice? So we went home, and I came in, and I slipped on the steps, which my mother kept our hardwood floors very well paste waxed, and they were beautiful. But I slipped, and the desert boots were in that era, and I just kind of slid down the stairs. My father came down. They saw me. He said to my mother to check me. My mother took me in the room, and she checked me, and it was reminiscent. We had poodles that we raised, and it was reminiscent of that experience. I was thinking at the time, this must be what Tinkerbell feels like. And then my mother said, yeah, I had been violated, that they'd gotten me, and my father beat me. And
he beat you?
He did. He beat me. He beat me with his belt. I had blood blisters up and down my legs, and then my mother took me upstairs, and she put me she made a tub of ultra hot water, and she made me get in, and I stepped in, and it was too hot, and she pushed me back in, and she scrubbed me down. And I remember a Brillo pad. I didn't include that in the book because I'm not actually sure it was a Brillo pad. She had a fondness for those, but I'm not sure that that's what she used. But then she got the scissors out and she hacked all my hair off. She ripped I had pierced earrings. That was just a new trend at the time. She ripped those out. She told me no man would ever want to have anything to do with me ever again. And then they dressed me afterwards I had to go to the precinct, and they did an exam on a big metal table. I guess it was in forensics, and it was very scary as a 12-year-old.
That's amazing.
Were all kinds of weird things hanging around. Anyhow, so that's kind of what happened, and I didn't mean to go into that much detail. But then after this occurred, our family, we didn't really speak about it again.
I'm just shocked. I'm feeling shock because didn't your parents understand that? I mean, your mother said yes, she was violated, and I can understand where she was coming from in terms of that word, but didn't they understand it was rape, that you were forced? This was not a consensual activity.
No, they didn't. They didn't view it as that. They treated me as if I had just gone out and had sex. And that's why I think at the time I thought of the French poodle, because our one poodle had gone out and gotten, pregnant off the cuff. And when we, had them with all papers and everything. So, no, they totally, at the time, viewed it as I had gone out and willingly had done this activity.
Wow.
Which I in my mindset, I've had 5 children since then, with a husband. And people always ask. But as I, transcended through time, and looking back, I wondered how they could have thought that. But I have done regressive hypnosis. And I know that my parents were very loving and innocent people. And my mother had been traumatized when she was a young girl by a close family member who then went to school and talked about it. And it was a repeat offense, and no one at that time did anything. In fact, I remember very young, we had a cousin who used to try to put grass in our pants, and I told my grandmother, and she said, "Oh, don't mention that ever again. Don't talk about that." Now, they didn't let him do anything with us anymore, but they, things have changed a lot over the years. In the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s, it was a woman's fault if that sort of activity occurred.
Were your parents highly religious?
My parents are Christians, and my father's passed now. They're religious. I wouldn't say that they're like fundamentalists or extremists in that regard. And in fact, I've actually turned out to be the more religious individual, but that's part of the effect of the trauma, partially.
Wow. Now, you state in some of the writings that I reviewed that your early childhood, so prior to the age of 12, was very innocent, and there was a lot of playfulness. It sounded very much like a childhood.
Yes.
Why was it so different between then? I mean, you were allowed to be a child and happy and play, and you were outside, and then after the age of 12, you were no longer a child.
Well, I asked my mother once. I said, I feel as if you felt like I was ruined when this event occurred, and she said, well, you were. And I know that what she had meant was that I was ruined in as far as my innocence was taken away, and I was no longer a virgin. But in my family, yes, I very much went from being a child to being a woman. There was no intermediary there. My parents did get me horses. I had 3 horses, and I used to show horses and lived everything horses 24/7, 365 after that. And I say in Stolen Lullabies and Secret Impasses that during that time frame, as long as I maintained my grades, which were always pretty good, and didn't have any events, things went along fairly well.
Now, how did your family continue to see you after the rape? as you grew through your adolescence? You said they didn't talk about it so much anymore, but did they treat you different?
Yes. Everyone did. We used to travel to South Carolina, and my father had cousins down there that were his age. They were his cousins. So they were second or third cousins to me. And I remember one cousin took me, was supposed to be driving me home from Main Street. And South Carolina it was a really small town in Walterboro. And there was only like one little road from the Dairy Queen, I think, to the firehouse where the people would go and they would ride as teenagers. And that was the thing you did back then, which sounds so altruistic now. But at any rate, we were doing that, and the cousin who was driving, she had to go do something, and so the older second cousin offered to drive me back to the aunt's house. And instead of doing that, he took me down this rural road and started, acting like he was going to culminate a sexual act with me. And I fought voraciously. And, he said to me, "You remind me of my first wife," which I thought was really, over the years, I've always thought that was a very obscure statement for that poor woman. But at any rate, I made my way out the car, and I was barefoot, and I was running down the gravel road for my life, and I finally couldn't run anymore, and he was fast on my heels. And I fell to my knees, and I started praying. And he had yanked me by the hair, and kind of helped in that, getting me on my knees. But my knees were bleeding, my feet were bleeding. So I was just praying for God to deliver me from this situation. And then he said, "I wouldn't do anything to you. I won't hurt you. Come on, let's get back in the car. I'll take you home." And he did. But here I was 13, and the aunt thought I had enticed him.
His wife?
Actually, no. His mother.
Okay.
His mother had thought that I had enticed him, and they always, acted like. And he was in his 40s, I'm sure, like 30s, 40s. At any rate, and another time we were at a family event, and an uncle who was an Air Force Chief Master Sergeant came down the stairs. They were having a gathering there, and while I'm walking by, he just reached his hand over and grabbed my breast. And the man who was behind him was another Air Force, major or something. They were out of uniform, of course, and he just chuckled. And that's kind of the way things went for a number of years.
This mentality of you have been raped. So you had sex in their eyes. You had sex, and so therefore it's okay to grab a breast, to chase you down, to grab your hair, to treat you like less than an animal. I mean, it amazes me, this mentality that I know goes around, but your story is the first one that I've heard to this degree, where this mentality continues. It just continues to perpetuate violence. It's just outrageous.
Yes, and the one cousin had said to me, "Well, why are you fighting so hard? This has already been done. There's nothing to lose here." I think part of that, although the one uncle wasn't from the South, I'm living in North Carolina now, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. There is this mentality of duality of men to women that still is pervasive in this area. And I know we're going through some differing court proceedings that are totally unrelated to all of this, but and even in the courtroom, I see that you're instructed not to look at the judge, to look subservient, to not address the men directly, not to look in direct eye contact. These are the things, I see attorneys throw paperwork at other female attorneys, male attorneys. The male attorneys have a lot of bravado. Now, there's some really excellent attorneys. It's not all of them. But that underlying thematic that, women are of a different nature than men, and once you've crossed the chasm of sexuality, you're either married or you're a whore.
Wow.
It's really kind of, it's still pervasive in some areas.
Right. Now, the man who raped you was not charged. Why?
No, actually, he was charged.
Okay.
When we went to court, they were talking to me about what had occurred, what transpired, and I didn't understand any of their questions. I think they started out with when did copulation occur, and I didn't know what copulation was, and then they went on with intercourse, and I and now I think I would have understood intercourse, but at the time I think the way that they presented the question, I was still in shock. I'm sure trauma. I didn't understand that, and I had been. Everything had changed about me. My hair was all different, and I, was dressed different. And I remember my mother started having me wear saddle Oxfords, and it's funny because in school, at first when I wore them, nobody wore them, and then like by the end of the year, everyone in school was wearing saddle Oxfords. So that was kind of a nice result. I guess it was a camaraderie of sorts. But in the courtroom, he had committed this act previously, but they felt that because I had gone to the scene with a group of people and they left me with him, I guess there wasn't enough probable cause to, and of course evidence was washed away because they had,
Right.
gave all those good things.
So they initially charged him, but they said they could not follow through with taking legal action.
Well, he was arrested and detained, and we went to court, and I did pathetically on the stand. And I remember my father telling me, he hoped that the community at large didn't get wind of this because it was going to ruin him. He didn't want they didn't want people to know about it. So, and I was once in the lunch line. I had to change schools and school districts, and I was in the new school district, and I was in the cafeteria, and a girl said to me, weren't you raped? Wasn't there a trial recently? My father was on the jury. And
Your father was on the jury?
Her father.
Her father.
A criminal. And I said, no, that wasn't me. No, I tried to. But in the family, it was never discussed again. Even to this day, if I bring it up, my mom's very gingerly now, so I don't bring it up. But there was a period of years where I wanted to kind of go back over things and discuss it, and my mother would go, "Oh, just don't talk about it." Now, my parents, in every other regard, were wonderful parents. I have to say, I had a good upbringing. They were generous to a fault. I mean, they gave each of us a home and a car for graduation.
Wow.
And my father worked hard for that. It's not like he came up in the deep South, and his mother had been a single mom, and his father died at a young age, and then his mother died when he was still a young man. But he really worked hard to achieve the things he had. So for us, and he was very good father, and my mom was a very good woman as well. And I love my mother. And part of my title, Stolen Lullabies and Secret Impasses, is about moving beyond, because you could have a lot of angst, and I know a lot of times I think about the young people, or you hear the stories of like the person that was locked in the closet, or you hear the story of the girl that like the girls in Ohio that were locked in the basement. I always wondered what happens to those people, and then I thought to myself, I am one of those people.
Right, and there is definitely a process to moving beyond that, which is a very important part of your journey and this interview. But I just do want to clarify, so the man who raped you was not, he did not go to prison or jail. He was not convicted, is what I'm understanding you're saying.
No, but I will tell you that when I got a little older, I traveled for about 15 years while I was married, and I lived in other states. I lived in nice states, Florida, California, and Hawaii, and I got a lot of sun time, and I had 5 children, and I was a true beach mom. But when I came back to Washington, I was attending college in town, and I saw the fellow who had raped me, and he had knelt at my feet and tied both his shoes. And when I went home, I called my parents and I said, you know, I saw him. I saw Santana at college. And my father said, oh, no, that wasn't him. He's dead. He was killed. And I know before the trial, my father had seen him in the mall, and he had punched him and knocked him over the banister, and he fell to the floor below the banister. That might have been part of the reason he got off. But, so there was a duality, even my own parents. I mean, they knew he violated me, but at the same time, it was a lot of the era, you know, he just really, they felt that it was part of, excuse me, this keeps doing this, it was part of the mindset in that era that if you were sexually violated, that you must have brought it on yourself. So, I mean, you know, that was difficult for my parents. And, you know, I can give you another...
Well, let's move into then in your marriage that you had later on, I think in your younger adult years, if I'm correct, and that marriage was riddled with domestic violence.
Yes.
So you have the trauma from the age of 12, and then you are treated differently by your family, which then led to some other traumas within your extended family, which then led to some other, well, more trauma within your first marriage.
Yes. I married twice. My first husband and I were kind of like high school sweethearts sort of thing. We met outside of school, but that was, you know, really what I would pit that relationship to. And I remember when we were going on our honeymoon, we didn't say anything to each other from the wedding to the honeymoon place, because I think we were both kind of like, what did we just do? But, you know, we had a lot of fun together initially. His parents were very demonstrative. They were very overbearing. They wanted him to do everything the way that they wanted it done. And after 6 months, I became pregnant. I thought I had the flu. And I went to the doctor for the flu, and he started laughing when I told him that I had a bug, but I, you know, was just throwing up. I wasn't getting a fever. And he goes, well, let's see what kind of flu you have. So anyhow, and my first husband was really excited. He went out and bought a life-size teddy bear. But his parents were so negative. You know, they said it's just a shame that you don't believe in abortion. You know,
Wow.
They were religious. And they said this is going to be an albatross. And he ended up having a nervous breakdown. So that did not work out well. And I moved on. I, you know, had a home that... through my family, and I moved into the home, and I'd asked him to come there, and he wanted to live with his family, and they wanted us to move with them, and they were going to dictate everything, and I didn't want to be living that life. So then I met my second husband shortly thereafter. Now I know in retrospect that after doing a lot of research and a lot of psychology, I think I read every book in the library relative to psychology and recovery and all of those great things, and self-improvement. And I learned that, you know, the 180ism of one relationship to the next is kind of, it is what people do if they don't give themselves time to recover for their first relationship. Mm-hmm. So my second husband was very logistical. He was very organized. He was a Marine. And, you know, I met him in uniform. And most of the time I saw him in uniform. I didn't know he didn't like to get, you know, a lot of nice clothes and things like that because he was always in uniform. But at any rate, we married, and we had a really good relationship on many levels, but if you questioned him, if you did not agree with him, if it wasn't going his way, he would lash out, and he was he could be very brutal.
So he hit you?
Yes, he
was physically abusive.
Mm-hmm. He held me upside down when I was 7 months pregnant, and looked me in the face and broke my toe and sprained my ankle. Then I went to the hospital and I told them that he had just done that, and the fellow working at the emergency said, well, you probably deserved it. And this goes back to when I was raped, and I was talking to the forensic examiner, and he said, who put the blisters on your legs? And I said, my father. And he said, well, you probably deserved it.
Jeez.
So that mentality kind of, you know, carried through time, you know, and into my marriage.
But eventually you began the healing process. I mean, what inspired you to say that this isn't working for me? These relationships are toxic. The abuse is no longer acceptable. I need to treat myself differently. I need to have different expectations for myself and my life. What led you to really begin making those choices?
Well, I continued in my faith. I am a Latter-day Saint, which came just before my second marriage, and I didn't really quite grasp the whole totality of that at the time. You know, I was learning, I was new. But also, I had, we were in Southern California, and I was taking my children to go to Disneyland, and on the way, somebody ran into us. It was a no-fault accident. The other person left the scene, but it wasn't my fault, so I'm trying to say. And I remember I prayed, I said, "Dear God, please, don't let anything happen to the children," and nothing did happen to the children. They didn't, they came out totally unscathed. However, I was knocked from the driver's seat to the passenger seat, and my femur, my hip, and my pelvis were broken, and I had to have 4 inches of my femur rebuilt. So after that occurred, while I was in traction and recovery, and when I first left the hospital, the children had been taken to 2 families while I was in recovery. So it was just me and my former husband. And when I first got home from the hospital in Tustin, I was up in the 2nd floor of where our apartment was. And he brought in food and stuff, and I still was immobile. I was on a bedpan. And he said, "Well, I'm going to Hawaii." Wow. Here you are. So he left for Hawaii, and there I was in an empty apartment without my children, no husband, just out of this really catastrophic injury. And his commanding officer came over, surprisingly, opened the door, and he came in and he said, "I'm taking you to our house." So he lifted me up and took me. I started in counseling at that time, and one of
receiving counseling or learning counseling?
Actually, receiving counseling, and I've done enough counseling over the years to qualify to give counseling. One of my counselors finally said to me, "Donna, there's nothing wrong with you, and this is an expensive way to have friends. You need to stop now." But she said to me while I was in talking with her the one day, she said, "When's the last time that you stopped and smelled a rose? Or, looked at flowers in a garden or observed nature?" And I thought to myself, it has been a long time. And I'm an inherently intelligent individual, and I managed to muster through all of these events and still maintain my self-worth, my dignity, and my ability to survive, and independently. And I realized that the people who were abusing me and assaulting me and violating me were not people who were as level-headed as I was in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. They might not have had the intellectual capacity that I did, and I was underselling myself in a lot of regards by even being in the circles that I allowed myself to be in, or allowing myself to go through those things. But at the time, after trauma, you don't realize that you're doing that. It takes a little while for you to move past being a victim. And,
yes, exactly.
And not, and you don't understand that you're allowing yourself to be victimized, and yet you are putting out to the universe, like everyone is doing today, where your affirmations, if you're speaking that to the universe, it is coming back to you. Mm-hmm. So I just changed my script. I looked at myself in the mirror. I said, "This is not what I want to do. I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I don't want my children to go through this. I want a different experience."
Exactly. Now, your book, Stolen Lullabies, offers insight to people's pain, their injuries, and also a way to find peace. How might a person experience peace through the writing?
Well, writing is cathartic. There's a theory that Aristotle said that poetics are the act of the theory of going through catharsis in the first place. That writing is the act of recovery. You have to live beyond your adversity and make your eternity responsive to the desires of your heart, to the desires of your soul, to your concept for who you are as a whole person. I'm not much for melodramatic love poems that young people have. My poems aren't. When people think of poetry, a lot of times, if they're not in the community, they a lot of times think of poetry as what you do when you're languishing over a romance or something. My poetics are more cerebral. They're intense. They're kind of untamed. They are discordant. Some of them are really garish. I have had some poetry that's really pretty edgy, and even other poets that read it are like, whoa, But the message is good. And I'm not a slam poet, but I am a performance poet in that regard. Writing does help. Not everyone feels they can write. Reading what someone writes in that vein is still effective to move beyond tragedy into triumph. You have to take the tragedy and just move it to a triumph. And you have to be able to reflect that, it's not you against the universe. You're not the only one who's gone through these sorts of things, which is why I shared this story. Other people go through these events as well. In fact, the statistics are fairly high. Still, at this time, in 2016, we have violence and child abuse and neglect, and child mortality rates are high. It's one of every 4 people is violated in some way, shape, or form. And it's not just women. Men also are succumbing to these things. And of course, we know from Catholicism and the unfortunism of some priests that men have been abused many years, throughout generations.
People just don't talk about it nearly as much. But I agree that there are many, many children who are being abused, sexually assaulted, not to mention the children sold into slavery. So many concerns that are going on. And what you're stating is that the poetry in your book can allow for someone to see that other people have gone through trauma as well, that it does not have to be the end of the world. And as you stated earlier, there's a choice in, am I going to be a victim or am I going to move beyond this? And that you can help someone see that anyone can move beyond a trauma and they do not need to remain a victim.
That's true. You can. And they do. Like I was saying earlier, when's the last time that you met somebody who was one of those people who suffered egregious acts that are in the news? I know from the statistics they're all over the place, but it isn't shared, so you don't know. I mean, when you go out to a luncheon, how many people in that room have been sexually violated? Percentage-wise, there's at least 40%. How many have been suffered child abuse and neglect? Well, that's probably half the room. So, we don't look at it in those terms because those people have transcended or not transcended. We might look at them and say, oh, that's a person of quality. We might look at somebody else and say, oh, they're not quite achieving, and they might not be achieving because they've sustained these sorts of things in their past as well.
Exactly. What I have learned in my studies and in my work, that when a person experiences a trauma, regardless if it's childhood or young adult years, it creates this energy of trauma around you, and then it ends up attracting, unconsciously, subconsciously, ends up attracting another trauma, which then adds to that trauma energy, then creates another trauma. And sometimes a person looking back 20, 30 years into their childhood, they might not see all of the connections, because they might see, well, this first event had nothing to do with the event that happened last year, so to speak. But if you were able to track it, you can see how one trauma led to the next one, just energetically speaking, and getting to a point where you were talking about, where you decide, this is it. Now, I'm not going to do this anymore. I need to change my script, as you put it. I need to change the way I'm thinking about myself and thinking about my life. That starts to kind of alter that energy to a degree to begin creating different experiences, which is essentially what most people want, is to create a different experience. Now we're running out of time. Where can people find your book?
The best place to find it is on my website. I do have a publishing initiative with 30 to 35 authors. I haven't counted recently, but it is Donna Inc. Publications. It's www.donnainc, DONNAINK, like an inkwell.com. And also I'm on Amazon and Kobo and all of those wonderful places, Kindle, and those sorts of things. So those are the places. They can contact me directly at dp@donnainc.com, and I will, get the email and give them a response.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Donna, so much for being a guest on my show today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I kind of did some oohing and ahhing here, but I really haven't. I haven't done a lot of interviews yet, and I have not gotten to, get my palate there for speaking.
It was great. It was great information. And I want to thank the listeners as well for joining me here on Journey for Truth on Spreaker.com and on YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.